Fire her immediately! The deep grating shout struck like a gavel, silencing the packed coffee shop in an instant. A coffee cup shattered on the tiled floor. Thick, dark liquid spread out, staining a pair of pristine, tailored trousers and leaving a long, wet smear on the crisp, white sleeve of a powerful man's shirt. Just seconds ago, the cafe had been alive with chatter, the hum of the espresso machine, and familiar pop music from the corner speakers. Now, it was silent. All that remained were the ragged breaths, the pounding heart of a young waitress, and the ice-cold glare of the man across from her. There was no need for introductions. Everyone knew who he was. A famous CEO, his face had graced the cover of Forbes. A man who could decide the fate of thousands with a single nod. He had entered this modest space like a king stepping down from his throne. Every step of his polished leather shoes echoed with authority across the tile floor. She stood frozen still, clutching the now empty tray, her eyes brimming with tears. She had just finished a grueling 14-hour shift. Her legs were numb, her eyelids heavy. But all that exhaustion meant nothing in the face of the sharp, cutting gaze leveled at her. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" His voice was low, cold, and dripping with contempt. The cafe held its breath. A few patrons furrowed their brows in sympathy. Others whispered quietly, eyes flickering between pity and curiosity. The girl bit her lip, hands trembling as she whispered, "I'm so sorry. It was just an accident, sir. I'll clean it right away." Silence. The single word cracked through the air like a whip. His eyes swept the room before landing on the cafe manager who stood frozen behind the counter. "Manager, fire her. Right now." The murmurs spread like wildfire. The manager paled, fumbling for words. The girl stood stunned as if turned to stone. Tears began to stream down her cheeks, mixing with cruel whispers behind her. "She's so clumsy she deserves it. Of all people to spill on it had to be him." The man flicked his hand as if swatting away an annoying insect. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at the stains on his shirt, never sparing her another glance. She stepped back, head bowed, still gripping the now ice-cold metal tray. Her lips quivered, but no sound came out. Her heart felt like lead in her chest. Just one moment and her already fragile world collapsed. The CEO turned and walked away, his posture straight, exuding arrogance. The entire cafe watched in silence like spectators to an execution. Outside the cafe window, a light drizzle fell, the raindrops streaking into long trails under the dim glow of the streetlights. The girl stepped out her coffee-stained uniform, clinging to her skin hair matted to her forehead, cold, exhausted, and utterly hopeless. Inside, the CEO settled into a premium leather chair reserved for VIP customers. A fresh espresso was placed in front of him, its rich aroma rising into the air, but he didn't even glance at it. His eyes held only contempt, smug satisfaction, and lingering irritation that his $1,000 suit had been ruined by someone so beneath him. Out on the sidewalk, the girl fumbled with an old, cracked phone. The screen flickered weakly as a message popped up. "Where's the rent for this month? If it's not here by tomorrow, you're out." Her vision blurred. She had hoped to pick up an extra morning shift to make a little more money, but now she had nothing. Back inside the cafe, a young staff member stepped forward, intending to mop up the spilled coffee on the floor. The CEO glanced over and spoke in a low voice, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is why I hate stepping into places like this. Always a mess, full of people who don't understand the value of perfection." Silence. The manager lowered his head. The employee backed away. The customers sat frozen, caught between fear and quiet outrage. Outside the glass, the girl was still there, now soaked as the drizzle turned into steady rain, her expression vacant. Slowly, she looked back inside. Her gaze locked directly on him, the CEO still seated firmly unmoved like a statue carved from stone. To him, she was nothing, just a clumsy, insignificant girl, disposable. But in her eyes, beneath the sorrow and unshed tears, there was something else. A strange flicker of light, as if the pain she'd just endured was only the beginning of a far greater storm. She turned away and walked into the rain, never looking back. No one in the cafe knew. No one could have imagined that this cruel moment was the very spark that would resurrect a past he had long tried to bury. And the girl he had just pushed into despair and humiliated in front of everyone was his own flesh and blood. Langford Tower pierced the gray city sky like a massive steel blade. Rising from the heart of downtown, its sharp lines and glass exterior commanded attention. On the 80th floor, the office of Alexander Vin, CEO of Langford Capital, was larger than most luxury apartments. Floor-to-ceiling windows turned the entire city into a miniature mural. From up here, traffic looked like swarming ants, and the hurried lives of people below blurred into a meaningless current. Alexander stood before the glass hands in his pockets, his gaze icy as it swept across the horizon. Born into poverty, he had once sworn never to bow to anyone. And he kept that promise. From an orphan with nothing, he had built a financial empire that made the entire market hold its breath. But the greater the success, the deeper the emptiness. Each night he returned to a vast, pristine penthouse silent hollow. No laughter, no one waiting. Just the echo of footsteps on marble, the pour of wine into crystal, and the mocking glitter of city lights whispering, "You have everything yet, nothing at all." His personal assistant, a middle-aged man named Richard, entered quietly and laid a thick stack of reports on the desk. "Sir, the shareholders are growing anxious about next week's merger. They want a clear statement from you." Alexander glanced at the papers, then nodded. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Let them wait. A man in power is never in a rush." Richard said nothing. He was used to this, his boss's cold efficiency. Alexander never let emotion interfere with decisions. To him, people were chess pieces. Useful ones were kept. Those who slipped removed without hesitation. For a fleeting moment, the image of the clumsy girl from that morning surfaced. Tearful eyes, shaking hands. Alexander frowned and dismissed it instantly. A useless girl. Not worth a second thought, he muttered to himself, topping off his glass of wine, eyes hollow. On the other side of the city, light rain still drizzled over rows of aging apartment blocks. On the third floor of a crumbling housing complex, a cramped rental room flickered under the pale yellow light of a worn-out bulb. Inside, the young woman, Mai An, quietly took off her coffee-stained apron and hung it on a rusty nail protruding from the wall. Her hands trembled not from the cold, but from the sting of humiliation still fresh in her chest. She sat on a squeaky metal-framed bed and pulled out her phone. Messages flooded the screen. "Mai, did you pay rent yet? The landlady's threatening to cut the power." "Sweetie, the hospital called again. This month's meds still aren't paid." Mai An buried her face in her hands as tears spilled over. Her mother had been hospitalized for months with heart disease. Mai had once tried to juggle college and work, but eventually had to drop out, unable to keep up with tuition and mounting medical bills. Since then, her life had revolved around back-to-back shifts, mornings at the cafe, nights cleaning offices. On the rickety table sat a small wooden box, one corner chipped off. Inside were only a few crumpled bills. She picked them up, counted again. Still not enough. Her throat tightened. The morning's events replayed in her mind, the CEO's furious shout cutting into her dignity like a blade. But Mai An refused to collapse. She wiped her tears, opened her old laptop. The screen flickered and buzzed faintly, but eventually lit up. She logged into a free online economics class, the field she once dreamed of studying. From the tinny speaker, the instructor's voice came through. "In every crisis, the most important thing is knowing how to find opportunity." Mai An gripped her pen tightly, scribbling down notes in messy handwriting. She whispered to herself, "One day I'll break out of this cycle. I'll prove my worth to the world." One sat atop the pinnacle of power, gazing down at the world with cold disdain. The other struggled at society's lowest rungs, clawing through each day to care for her ailing mother and chase a dream she once had to abandon. Neither of them knew that fate had secretly bound their lives together long ago. That night, Alexander sat alone in a room awash in soft amber light. He pulled a small wooden box from a drawer and opened it. Inside was a faded, yellowing photograph of a young woman with bright brown eyes and a gentle smile. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "I chose this path, and I lost you because of it." It was a memory he had buried deep. A love from his youth broken when he chose ambition over everything else. From that moment on, Alexander had never allowed himself to feel weakness again. Meanwhile, in her tiny rental room across the city, Mai An also reached into a drawer and pulled out something old. A photograph of her mother as a young woman, those same radiant brown eyes identical to her own. She held the picture close and whispered, "Mom, I promise I won't give up. I'll chase down the dream we both had." Two people, one powerful, one poor, each clutching a piece of their past in the darkness. Unaware that the truth they both held close was the blood tie between them. The next morning, headlines exploded with rumors. CEO Alexander caught on camera yelling at cafe staff, fires waitress in public. Someone had filmed the outburst and the video quickly went viral. Thousands of comments flooded in. "Typical him, arrogant and ruthless. That poor girl. One accident and she's out of a job. The rich will never understand what it means to struggle." Alexander read the news, his brow furrowed. He hated scrutiny, but instead of regret, irritation flared in him. "Let's see how long they keep talking," he muttered, lighting a cigar, releasing thick white smoke into the air around him. Meanwhile, Mai An's heart sank when she saw the clip, her in the center of it all. There were sympathetic comments, sure, but mixed among them were mocking, condescending ones. She deleted the app and tossed her phone onto the bed. The shame only deepened. At Langford Tower, Brenda Alexander's late wife's younger sister arrived in her usual air of elegance and poise. She often called herself the last real family and the keeper of the family legacy. But behind that sugary smile was calculation. Brenda had her eyes on control of the Langford empire, and to get it, she needed to prove Alexander was no longer fit to lead. On the other side of the city, Mai An's only real friend was Lon, her co-worker from the night cleaning shift. Lon knew everything how Mai once dreamed of becoming a financial expert, how she still stayed up after every exhausting shift to take online courses. Lon would often comfort her. "One day you'll hold your head high, Mai. Don't let someone like him crush you." Mai An managed a faint smile, but inside the fire of determination still burned quiet but unshakable. A week passed. Mai An kept struggling, juggling hospital visits for her mother while desperately searching for a new job. Every time she passed through the city center and looked up at the towering Langford Tower, a strange feeling stirred within her, a mix of anger and an inexplicable pull. Alexander, on the other hand, buried himself in the year's biggest corporate deal. His days were packed with meetings, numbers, and strategy. But at night, when he stood before the mirror, he'd occasionally see her eyes tearful, trembling. Strangely, that look unsettled him. Something distant, long buried, stirred quietly within. 3 days after her In silence, Mai An held her mother close, gently brushing her hair back, whispering through tears. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore, but I promise I won't let go." The next morning, Alexander arrived at the hospital where Mai An cared for her mother. He wore a dark suit, his presence as commanding as ever, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, a heaviness deeper than sleeplessness. Doctors and nurses recognized him instantly, offering hurried bows and greetings. Down the hall, Mai An sat slumped on a bench, her eyes dark from a sleepless night. When Alexander approached, she shot to her feet, instantly tense. "What are you doing here?" Her voice cracked with resentment. Alexander answered slowly, evenly. "I came to check on your mother's condition, and to say I will cover all of her medical expenses." She froze, her hands clenched into fists. Inside her, grief and pride clashed like fire and ice. "Who do you think you are?" she snapped. "You humiliated me in front of the world, and now you want to throw me charity? I don't want it." Her voice echoed down the hallway. A few patients turned to look. Alexander said nothing, but behind his silence, his eyes screamed with unspoken agony. "This isn't charity. It's redemption. I just want to make things right with my daughter." As the doctor led Alexander into the hospital room, a coincidence perhaps fate awaited. On the bedside table stood a worn picture frame. Inside it, a faded photograph of a young Lan An. Her bright brown eyes, that gentle smile. Alexander stopped in his tracks, his breath caught in his throat. That face, the same one that had haunted his memory for decades. Suddenly, a weak, rasping voice broke the silence. "You still remember her?" It was Mai An's mother, half-conscious, murmuring through the haze of illness. Alexander trembled. Slowly, he knelt beside the bed and took her hand. "Lan An, I'm sorry, I left you. I abandoned you when I should have stayed." Tears spilled down his face, tears no one in the corporate world had ever seen. This was not the cold CEO. This was the man she once loved, broken, repentant. At that moment, Mai An entered the room and froze. She stood in silence, stunned. For the first time, she saw something in Alexander she never thought possible: vulnerability. A few days later, as Mai An was sorting through her mother's belongings, she stumbled upon something buried deep in a drawer, an old, faded diary. Curious, she opened it. The yellowed pages held memories written in her mother's delicate handwriting. They spoke of a young love, with a man named Arthas, a nickname from his student days. Alexander. He said he would come back, but he disappeared, leaving me alone with a child growing inside me. I named her Mai An because she became my only source of comfort. Mai An's hands trembled. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. She flipped to another page, breath hitching. "Anne, if you ever go searching for your father, please remember he once loved your mother. Even though he chose to leave, that love was real." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She collapsed onto the floor, clutching the diary to her chest, mind spinning, heart shattering. The truth had been there all along, not just in blood, but in love, in loss, and now in her hands. Just as Mai An was beginning to process the truth of her past, Brenda struck again. She orchestrated a press event under the guise of a corporate announcement, but in reality, it was a calculated ambush. During the briefing, a manipulated video was released. Carefully edited footage painted Mai An as a social climber, someone scheming to seduce Alexander for wealth and status. Online, the headlines exploded. "Mystery Girl CEO Langford's young mistress." From coffee shop to corporate bed, who is Mai An? The city buzzed with gossip. Everywhere Mai An went, she was met with sneers, whispering, and thinly veiled contempt. Her reputation, already fragile, collapsed under the weight of lies. Meanwhile, in his office, Alexander watched the doctored video. His jaw clenched. His fists balled so tight his knuckles turned white. He knew exactly whose game this was. Brenda's fingerprints were all over it. But he also knew exposing her would require more than suspicion. Right now he had no hard proof, and Mai An was being crucified. On a restless night, unable to sleep, Alexander returned to the old villa, a place he'd long avoided. There, tucked away in a storage box filled with forgotten memories, he found a bundle of unopened letters. They were from Lan An, letters he had never dared to read. With trembling hands, he tore one open. "Arthas," it began, "our child has been born. She has your eyes. Her name is Mai An." Alexander crumpled to the floor, the letter clutched to his chest. His entire body trembled. There was no more room for denial, no more doubt. The girl he had humiliated, driven to tears, cast out in front of the world, was his daughter, his own blood. The next day, Alexander found Mai An sitting alone on a worn bench in a small park near the hospital. Her eyes were swollen, ringed with exhaustion from too many sleepless nights. He approached slowly, each step heavier than the last. He wanted to say it, "My daughter," but the words lodged in his throat. At last, he stood before her and said, voice trembling, "Mai An, your mother once wrote to me, I am your father." The world seemed to shatter around her. Mai An shot to her feet, horror flashing in her eyes. "What did you say, my father? No, stop mocking me. I've had enough." Tears burst forth as she bolted from the bench, running blindly. Alexander took a step after her, then stopped. His legs were frozen, his chest tight, because he understood words alone wouldn't be enough. Not after everything he had done. Brenda orchestrated a lavish party, inviting influential shareholders, high-ranking executives, and media representatives. Whispers circulated ahead of the event rumors that Mai An would be making an appearance to claim her stake. Indeed, Mai An received an anonymous invitation. She hesitated, wary of another trap. But then she thought, if they're going to drag me through the mud again, I won't run. I'll face it. The ballroom sparkled under chandeliers filled with chatter and clinking glasses. And when Mai An walked in, every head turned. Hundreds of eyes locked onto her, full of judgment, curiosity, and malice. Brenda, standing by the podium, offered a sweet but venomous smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth, "this is the young woman rumored to be manipulating Mr. Alexander for her personal gain." Gasps, murmurs, camera flashes erupted like lightning. Mai An stood frozen, heart racing. But she didn't bow her head. She lifted her chin and stood tall, shaking but unbroken. Then a voice cut through the crowd. Deep, commanding, final. "Enough." Alexander rose from his seat. His presence silenced the room. "Brenda, this vile game ends here, tonight." Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out a collection of documents, aged letters. Pages from a worn diary and a sealed DNA test report he had quietly commissioned. His voice rang clear and firm. "Everyone listen carefully. Mai An is my biological daughter." The ballroom fell into stunned silence. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the marble floor. Gasps echoed. Murmurs exploded. Brenda stood frozen, her face drained of color. On the far side of the room, Mai An stood paralyzed. Her entire body trembled. Her heart felt like it had stopped beating. The words echoed in her mind like thunder. "Biological daughter, he is my father." The air grew thick, so tense it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. Alexander stepped down from the stage, walking slowly toward Mai An. His eyes, always so composed now, shimmered with tears. "My child," he began, voice raw. "I'm sorry. I've been wrong for over 20 years. I abandoned your mother, and I abandoned you. But from this day forward, I swear I will never leave you again." The room stood still, not a breath, not a whisper. But then Mai An broke. Tears streaming down her face, she cried out, "No, you're not my father. My father never existed. The man standing in front of me is a stranger, one who destroyed my life." Her voice cut through the silence like glass. Then, without waiting for a response, she turned and ran out of the room, out of the light, out of reach. Alexander sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the man who once stood above them all now looked utterly broken. Amid the chaos, a security officer hurried toward Alexander, leaning in to whisper something urgent. They had obtained surveillance footage, clear evidence showing Brenda sneaking into Mai An's room, planting items to stage the scandal that had tarnished her name. Alexander's expression shifted from despair to fury. He turned sharply toward Brenda, his voice thunderous. "It was you framed Mai An. You smeared her name, lied to everyone. What do you have to say for yourself now?" Brenda's face turned ghostly pale. She stammered, unable to form a coherent word. Around her, shareholders and executives began to back away, their expressions twisted with disgust. Alexander stood tall, voice echoing through the hall. "Effective immediately, you are stripped of all positions and assets within this company. And hear me clearly, if you ever lay a finger on my daughter again, I will see you in court." The room erupted not with applause, but with murmurs of shocked approval. Brenda, once calculating and untouchable, was now nothing but a disgraced figure crumbling beneath the weight of her own schemes. Mai An burst through the grand doors into the night, where rain poured like punishment from the sky. She stood in the downpour, gasping for breath between sobs. Her heart felt like it might tear apart. Her father. The man who humiliated her. The man who left her mother to suffer alone and die. It was too much. Behind her, Alexander rushed out, rain soaking through his clothes in seconds. "Mai An," he cried, voice cracking. "I'm sorry, please, give me a chance." She stood still, shaking her head slowly. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. Softly, almost inaudibly, she whispered, "I don't need you." Then she turned away, disappearing into the curtain of rain, leaving Alexander standing alone, drenched and broken in the storm. Back at the villa, Alexander sat alone in silence, staring at an old photograph of Mai An. Her smile, gentle and haunting, seemed to echo through the quiet room. The truth was out. But the real battle had just begun. Not for his reputation, not for power, but for something far more fragile and far more precious, his daughter's trust. Across the room, a soft, mechanical voice broke the silence. Little Jay, Alexander's youngest son, sat by the computer. Typing with focus, his screen spoke aloud. "Grace needs to come home." Alexander turned to look at him, and in Jay's innocent eyes, he found something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. He knelt beside his son, placed a hand gently on his shoulder, and said, "You're right, Jay. Your sister needs to come home, and I'll bring her back, no matter what it takes." After that fateful night, the news exploded like a storm across every channel screen and street corner. Headlines screamed, "CEO Alexander Langford admits to having an illegitimate daughter." From coffee shop waitress to lost heiress. Brenda Caldwell speaks out, "It's all a scam to steal the Langford legacy." The entire city reeled. Television broadcasts, print media, and social platforms ran endless loops of Mai An breaking down at the gala, tears streaming as she fled into the pouring rain. The clip went viral, millions of views in mere hours. Public opinion split in two. One side lashed out at Alexander. "Where's the moral compass of a top CEO? He cheated, abandoned a woman and child, and now conveniently claims them back to fix his image." The other side empathized deeply with Mai An. This poor girl raised in poverty, now dragged into a media circus. And all she did was survive. Mai An became the center of every conversation. No matter where she went, people stared. Their eyes were filled with a toxic blend, pity, envy, and judgment. Brenda seized the moment like a seasoned predator sensing blood. She called for a press conference, presenting herself with an air of calm dignity, wrapped in mourning tones and moral authority. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in. "Please understand!" Brenda began, her voice trembling with calculated emotion. "I only want to protect the legacy of my late sister, the rightful wife of Alexander Langford. That girl," she paused as if choked by sorrow, "has nothing but ambition and deceit. It breaks my heart to see this company threatened by a complete stranger." Then came the so-called evidence. Brenda unveiled several photos, grainy, clearly manipulated, but convincing enough for public consumption. In them, Mai An appeared to be in secret meetings with a shady-looking financial broker, captured mid-conversation as if negotiating something illicit. Brenda implied it was an attempt to leak confidential company information, or worse, to profit off her newfound identity. The media devoured it. Every detail, every accusation was magnified. Once again, Mai An's image was smeared now with the stain of corporate betrayal. The public, already unsure, tilted further into doubt. In her cramped, dimly lit room, Mai An curled up on the edge of her creaky bed, clutching her mother's old diary like a lifeline. The world outside roared with noise, headlines, rumors, judgmental voices all pounding on the walls like relentless hammers. She didn't dare go outside, didn't dare unlock her phone. Every comment felt like a blade, typical gold digger. Well, she found the right guy to latch on to. Daughter of a CEO living in a slum, obvious scam. Her head dropped tears, spilling silently onto the yellowed pages of the diary that once held her mother's dreams. In a whisper so soft only the walls could hear, she murmured, "Mom, what did I do wrong? I only ever wanted a quiet life." But peace, it seemed, was the one thing the world refused to let her have. At Langford Group headquarters, a storm was brewing. Behind closed doors, the executive boardroom was packed wall to wall with shareholders and senior leaders. The air was thick with tension. All eyes were fixed on Alexander Langford, the man who once seemed invincible, now backed into a corner by scandal. One major shareholder stood and slammed his hand on the table. "Mr. Langford, your personal scandal is destroying this company. Stock prices have plummeted. International contracts are on hold. We demand your resignation." At the far end of the room, Brenda sat calmly, arms crossed, a faint, triumphant smile tugging at her lips. Alexander clenched his fists. Inside, he wrestled with the question that had haunted him for days. Stay silent and let Brenda win, or shatter the illusion of invulnerability and lay the truth bare. Then slowly he rose from his seat. His voice, when it came, echoed with clarity and weight. "You're right. I made mistakes. I abandoned a woman I once loved and the daughter we had together. That is the darkest stain on my life." The room went dead silent. But resigning now just to escape the consequences would make me a coward, and I won't be one. I am staying, not to protect my power but to make things right, not with words but with action. The boardroom held its breath. For the first time, they didn't see Alexander Langford, the untouchable CEO. They saw a man flawed, exposed, and fiercely human. That night, Brenda took center stage on live television. Poised and rehearsed, she presented what she claimed to be a final will and testament from Mai An's late mother. The so-called document stated that An had received financial support and had explicitly declined Alexander's involvement in her or the child's life. "The truth is simple," Brenda said, her voice dripping with manufactured sorrow. "That woman never wanted Alexander or her illegitimate child to become part of this family. That's what the public deserves to know." Her words were delivered like a death sentence, cold, deliberate, final. And they landed with full force. For Mai An, watching from her tiny room, it was the last dagger to the heart. All the strength she had fought to hold on to crumbled. The lie was complete, and the world was watching. As the storm raged outside the train station, wind howled through steel beams and rain slashed the glass panes like icy knives. Inside, on a lonely wooden bench, Mai An sat hunched forward, her old backpack at her feet. Her face was pale, hollow, empty. She was ready to leave everything behind. Then footsteps. Alexander, drenched and breathless, stepped into the station, scanning the rows until his eyes found her. Without a word, he walked straight to her and dropped to his knees. Gasps echoed across the terminal. "Is that Alexander Langford?" "He's kneeling to her." Whispers swirled, phones were raised, but Alexander didn't care. None of it mattered. "Mai An," he choked, eyes red. "I'm sorry. You can hate me for the rest of your life, but please, don't leave. If you walk away now, I lose everything." Mai An gave a bitter smile through rain and tears. "You already had everything. I was just the stain you tried to scrub away. Let me disappear for good." But Alexander didn't move. Instead, with trembling hands, he pulled a bundle of worn letters from his pocket, sealed, yellowed with time. "These were from your mother. She wrote them for me. I never opened them, until it was too late." He held them out, voice barely holding. "Every letter. She wrote about you, about how proud she was. She wanted me to know that, to know you." Mai An's hand trembled as she reached out. Her fingers brushed the paper, familiar handwriting, faded ink. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain, soaking into the pages. And for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like a wall. It felt like the beginning. In that very moment, amid the chaos at the train station, a notification buzzed on every spectator's phone. Breaking news security footage proves Brenda forged the will. The video spread instantly, a clear, undeniable CCTV clip showing Brenda surreptitiously exchanging envelopes, presumably bribes or falsified documents, with a known forger. The revelation exploded across the city. Brenda was immediately summoned by the police for questioning, and in that instant the tide turned. The following day, Alexander stood before a sea of cameras and flashing lights. But this time, he wasn't the untouchable titan of industry. His eyes were swollen, voice heavy with emotion. Behind him, Mai An stood, still hesitant, still guarded but present. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his tone measured, steady, vulnerable. "I'm not here today as a CEO. I'm here as a father. I made mistakes. I let a cruel woman manipulate me. I allowed my daughter to suffer publicly unjustly. Today I'm here to say this plainly. Mai An is my daughter, and I owe her more than words. I owe her my protection, my respect, and my truth. From this moment on, anyone who dares to hurt her will answer to me." The statement echoed like a thunderclap. Cameras flashed. Live streams surged with millions of viewers. The world watched breathless. Moments later, police escorted Brenda out in handcuffs. She screamed denials, thrashed, cursed, but it was over. The evidence was irrefutable. Her empire of lies had finally crumbled. Even though the truth had finally come to light, forgiveness did not come easily. That evening, after the press conference, Mai An sat alone in one of the quiet rooms of the Langford estate. The soft, golden lights and walls adorned with oil paintings felt cold, distant, unable to fill the emptiness inside her. Then a knock. Alexander entered slowly without fanfare. No suit, no image to uphold, just a wrinkled shirt, tired eyes, and a man stripped of armor. "You don't have to believe me right away," he said softly. "But please, let me earn the chance to be a father. A real one." Mai An burst into tears.
"A chance?" she shouted through sobs. "What about my mother? She died alone. Who gave her a chance?"
Alexander fell to his knees, his shoulders shaking.
"I can't change the past," he whispered. "But I can give everything I have, everything I am, to make things right with you. For as long as I live."
And for the first time, the silence between them didn't scream with pain. It trembled with the beginning of healing. The climax had arrived, the final showdown. A special emergency board meeting. Whispers in every corridor. Would they finally oust Alexander Langford for good? But this time Alexander didn't walk in alone. Mai An stood beside him, still fragile, still healing, but there. They entered together, the blinding white lights overhead casting long shadows across the polished floor. He didn't wait for the accusations. He faced the table calm but resolute and said,
"You may strip me of my title, but you will never take away my right to be a father. I am ready to give up Langford Group, my legacy, everything, if that's what it takes to protect my daughter."
The room fell into stunned silence. Then an unexpected voice broke through. An elder board member, once a staunch critic, rose from his seat. "I've seen Mr. Langford conquer markets, silence rivals, and lead this empire with an iron will," he said slowly. "But today, I saw a man willing to kneel before the one thing that truly matters. I support him." One by one, others began to nod, not for power, not for profit, but for the man Alexander had become. And just like that, Brenda's influence shattered. Her reign was over. And for the first time, Alexander's greatest victory wasn't measured in numbers, but in redemption. Alexander and Mai An stand atop the rooftop of Langford Tower. The wind sweeps through their hair, cool and relentless. Below them, the city stretches endlessly alive with lights pulsing with life. They say nothing at first, just stand side by side, two broken pieces beginning to fit again. Then Alexander speaks quietly, almost to himself. "I used to think all this light belonged to me, but I was blind. You are the real light." Mai An turns to him. Tears fall, but this time they carry something new. In her eyes, for the first time, there is hope. The screen fades to black. Silence. Breathless, heavy, full of meaning. The rain had stopped. A new morning dawned over the city, quieter than before. The gossip that once flooded every corner had faded to whispers, but the weight of the recent scandal still hung in the air like mist. Inside the Langford estate, the long corridor lay bathed in soft golden light. Each footstep echoed like a ghost from the past. In his study, Alexander sat alone. There were no million-dollar contracts on the desk. No stock reports, no corporate agendas. Only one thing lay before him now, a worn journal, its corners frayed, its pages yellowed with time. Lanan's diary, the woman he once loved, the woman he had betrayed. He turned the pages slowly, hands trembling, vision blurred by tears that refused to stop. And there, in her gentle, slanted handwriting, a message rose from the past, whispering through time, "If one day you find her, tell her she was never a burden. She was my pride, my world." Alexander's breath caught. His hands shook. And in that moment, for the first time in decades, he didn't feel like a CEO. Not a mogul, not a titan, just a broken, aging man drowning in guilt, longing for a second chance. News of Brenda's arrest spread like wildfire. Audio recordings, security footage, and documents, all undeniable, surfaced publicly. They exposed her lies, her forged will, her manipulation of the media, and her secret dealings with shadowy partners to seize control of the Langford estate. The image of a grieving guardian shattered. Inside the holding cell, Brenda sat in silence. Her makeup had long since melted away, revealing a hollow, aged face marked with bitterness and decay. Her eyes still burned with hatred. "That girl, she took everything from me." She muttered it over and over like a curse. But this time, no one was listening. No one believed. The media dubbed her the venomous widow, a symbol of unchecked greed. Once hailed as the keeper of family honor, she was now the face of scandal. Her defenses meant nothing now. Brenda had lost it all, her reputation, her influence, her grip on power. And the world, once at her feet, had moved on without mercy. Meanwhile, Mai An remained in hiding. She had been moved to a quiet apartment away from the storm of cameras and questions. But the silence only made her thoughts louder. She stood before a mirror. The reflection that stared back wasn't the tired cafe waitress, nor was it the so-called lost daughter of a CEO. It was just her, a young woman fragile and torn, caught between two identities, two lives, two versions of herself that refused to coexist. In her mind, voices clashed. Forgive him. Where was he when Mom was dying? Where was he when you went to bed hungry, studying by a flickering bulb? He left you behind. Then another voice, softer, gentler, but he kneeled for you. He faced the world and called you his daughter. He turned against everything he built just to keep you. Her heart tugged in both directions like a rope worn thin by too many years of silence, shame, and sorrow. And still, she didn't know which voice to follow. 1 week later, Alexander held a ceremony, but not in a grand ballroom, not under glittering chandeliers. It was a quiet gathering held at a modest hall, the newly opened Mai An Foundation, named in honor of the woman he had once lost. There were no gold trophies, no flashing stage lights, just rows of orphaned children, patients receiving aid, and a few kind-hearted reporters who respected silence more than scandal. Alexander stepped up to the podium, his gaze steady, voice calm but charged with emotion. Today, I am not here to speak about stocks, profits, or legacy. I'm here to admit a truth. I was selfish. I was ruthless. I was blind. But I am also here to begin again. This foundation is dedicated to Mai An, the woman who taught me what love was. And it is named not just in memory of her, but in honor of my daughter Mai An, who is teaching me what forgiveness means. The room stirred. Camera shutters clicked softly. In the audience, Mai An sat silently, unprepared, overwhelmed. She had not expected him to speak her name, much less like that, with reverence, with pride. Then Alexander lowered his head deeply, far deeper than any business bow he had ever given. His voice softened, almost trembling. Mai An, I'm sorry. I won't ask you to forgive me today. But if you let me, I will walk beside you one step at a time. And in that moment, it wasn't the room that held its breath. It was her. The room was utterly still. Every eye turned to Mai An. She rose slowly, her hands clenched tightly by her sides. Her steps toward the stage were hesitant but steady. The spotlight fell on her face, revealing the glisten of tears and the rawness in her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was soft, trembling but clear, echoing through the hall. I once hated him. I used to wish I had never met him. She paused, gathering herself as the silence wrapped around her. But when I saw him kneel before me, I realized just for that moment I was no longer abandoned. I was his daughter. A hush fell, then a wave of emotion surged across the room. People wept quietly, unashamed. Alexander's chest rose with a shaky breath. His arms opened wordlessly. Mai An hesitated, then ran to him. He caught her, holding her tightly, desperately, like a man clinging to a second chance he never thought he'd get. It wasn't the embrace of a CEO. It was the trembling, grateful embrace of a father who had finally found his child. The court convened for a public trial. Brenda Caldwell, once a figure of elegance and power, now stood alone, facing a list of charges that stretched like a reckoning: fraud, forgery, defamation. The courtroom was packed. Thousands watched the proceedings live. Mai An sat quietly near the back, no longer trembling, no longer hiding. For the first time, she looked at Brenda without fear. What she saw wasn't the manipulative force that once controlled the narrative, but a frail, broken woman crushed under the weight of her own greed. The judge's voice rang out firm and final. Brenda Caldwell, for your crimes, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison. Brenda collapsed to her knees. Her eyes, once sharp with control, now burned with bitter resentment. But no one flinched. No one came to her defense. She had played her last hand and lost everything. Alexander reached over gently, tightening his grip around Mai An's hand. His voice was low, steady, and full of promise. "No one will ever hurt you again." Time passed. The headlines faded. The chaos subsided. And from the ashes of scandal and heartbreak, something new began to grow. Mai An gradually adapted to her new life, not as a disgraced cafe waitress, nor as the privileged daughter of a tycoon, but as herself, a young woman shaped by hardship and strengthened by it. A woman who no longer needed to prove her worth because she knew it. She took on a leadership role at the Mai An Foundation, the charity named after her mother. Every morning she visited children with disabilities, taught them, read them stories, played piano to lift their spirits. And every time they laughed freely, purely, she saw a flash of Jay, the disabled boy she once comforted in a rainy cafe. It was more than a memory. It was a full-circle moment. She was no longer saving herself. She was giving others what she never had. As for Alexander, he had changed too. He no longer lived in boardrooms and financial forecasts. He lived in the small moments, learning how to listen, slowing down, burning toast and over-salting soup just to prepare a humble meal for his daughter. He was no longer the man who owned the city skyline. He was the man who had learned to kneel and rebuild. Even Langford Group evolved. Once a cold corporate monolith, it became a symbol of corporate conscience leading initiatives in healthcare, education, and justice. Because power had taught them little, but loss, forgiveness, and love, those taught them everything. At a major company event, one that marked a new chapter in Langford Group's legacy, Alexander stepped onto the grand stage. The auditorium was packed with thousands of employees, partners, and media. But this time, the spotlight wasn't just on him. He extended his hand, and invited Mai An to step forward. As she joined him, he addressed the crowd not as a CEO, but as a father, a man transformed. "This is my daughter, the one who reminded me that our greatest value is not profit, but people. Starting today, she will walk this journey with us." The room erupted into thunderous applause. Mai An looked out over the crowd faces she once feared would judge her. But now she saw no doubt, no pity, only admiration, respect, and trust. She smiled softly, steadily, and in her eyes a quiet light shimmered. It wasn't just the light of redemption. It was the beginning of something entirely her own. Night had fallen. On the rooftop of the Langford Tower, father and daughter stood side by side, the city sprawled beneath them, alive with lights, quiet with possibility. The wind was gentle, the silence full. Alexander looked out, then spoke, his voice low, thoughtful. "I used to think success meant standing above everything and everyone. But now I know. Real success is having someone beside you holding your hand." Mai An reached over gently, taking his hand in hers. She smiled softly. "I used to think happiness was having a life of wealth and comfort. But now I know. It's simply having a real family." Their silhouettes stood together strong and still framed against the glowing cityscape. And as the lights flickered below and the stars blinked above, they didn't just share a view, they shared a future. This story reminds us money can buy power and prestige, but it can't buy family. Only love and forgiveness can heal the deepest wounds. Have you ever been angry with someone in your family? Felt like it was too late to make things right? Remember, sometimes all it takes is one step, one embrace, one simple "I'm sorry" to save an entire lifetime. The screen fades to black. Then words begin to appear. If you believe family is life's greatest treasure, leave a comment, share this video, and hit subscribe to help us spread more stories that touch the heart.